At 55 years old, I honestly thought I had figured out the shape of my life. I had a decent job at a logistics firm here in Denver, a quiet house on a tree-lined street in the Washington Park neighborhood, and a marriage that, on paper at least, looked like something people would envy. But everything I believed about my own life unraveled in a single evening, when I stood on my own porch, keys still dangling from my fingers, and heard my wife say through the half-open kitchen window, "He won't push back. He never does. He just signs." And something inside my chest went cold in a way I had never felt before. I didn't walk in. I didn't cough. I didn't jingle my keys. I just stood there, breathing slowly, as my future was being rearranged without me in a conversation I wasn't supposed to hear. And in that exact moment, I understood something even heavier than betrayal. I understood that I had become predictable. Let me pause right here and be honest with you. Because if you're watching this, maybe you already know this feeling too. That slow, sinking recognition that the people closest to you have been studying you like a puzzle they already solved. I want you to stay with me, because what happened next in my life changed everything I thought I knew about trust, about family, and about the dangerous comfort of routine. My name is Thomas Whitfield. I grew up in a small town outside of Boulder, moved to Denver in my late 20s, and I've lived here ever since. For most of my adult life, I truly believed that being a good husband meant being a dependable one. I showed up. I worked overtime when it mattered. I paid the bills on time. I avoided arguments that didn't need to happen. My wife, Caroline, was always the decisive one between us. She handled our budget, our vacations, our long-term plans. She had this way of framing every big decision so that it sounded like the only rational path forward. And for years, I admired that quality in her. I thought it was strength. Her mother, Margaret, had been living with us for nearly 9 years at that point. It had been Caroline's suggestion after Margaret sold her little bungalow in Colorado Springs. At the time, moving her in seemed reasonable. That's what I kept telling myself anyway. Margaret was polished, articulate, sharp as a tack even in her 70s. She never raised her voice. She never demanded anything directly. But somehow, every conversation in our home slowly bent in whatever direction she preferred. I didn't see the pattern early on. Families shift. Roles rearrange. People settle into rhythms. And I had settled into mine, too comfortably, as I would eventually learn. Let me tell you something I've been thinking about lately. A lot of men my age, especially here in America, get praised for being the steady one, the reliable one, the good provider, and we wear that label like a medal, never questioning what it's actually costing us. Every 2 weeks, my paycheck flowed straight into our joint account. Caroline would sit at the breakfast nook with her laptop, her reading glasses slipping down her nose, moving numbers around like she was playing chess against nobody in particular. Sometimes she'd glance up and ask, "Does that work for you, Tom?" But it wasn't really a question. It was a formality, a small ritual we both performed. I'd nod, she'd smile, and the money would move wherever she decided it should go. I trusted her completely. That was the simple, uncomplicated truth of the first decade of our marriage. But something had shifted in the last year or so, and looking back, the signs were everywhere. I just refused to read them. Conversations lingered a little too long around certain topics. Questions felt rehearsed. Margaret kept circling the same financial themes over and over, like a hawk tracing the same invisible circle in the sky. One evening, about 3 weeks before everything exploded, Caroline was stirring her chamomile tea at the kitchen island, not looking at me. "We should really think about upgrading, honey," she said in that casual tone she always used when she was anything but casual. "The housing market here in Denver is moving fast. If we don't act, we'll be kicking ourselves in 5 years. Margaret, sitting on the bar stool beside her, nodded slowly. "A mortgage isn't a burden when it's structured correctly," she added, voice smooth as warm honey. "It's leverage, Thomas. That's what real wealth builders understand." I leaned back in my chair, watching them from across the room. "We already have a house," I said quietly. "It's been paid off for 6 years. Why would we voluntarily put ourselves back under a lender at my age?" Caroline gave me that smile, that patient, almost sympathetic smile that she reserved for moments when she thought I was being slow. "Because standing still isn't safe, Tom. Sometimes it's the biggest risk of all." I didn't argue, not because she was right, but because I already knew how the argument would end. That had been the pattern for years. Push gently, nod, retreat, agree. And here's where I want to stop and say something directly to you, the person listening. If you've ever felt yourself agreeing to things just to avoid a long conversation you know you'll lose, that's not peace. That's surrender dressed up as harmony. I wish someone had told me that 20 years ago. A few days after that tea conversation, I stayed late at the office, working through some quarterly reports. The building had emptied out hours earlier. You know that specific silence at night in an office tower. Just the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant whoosh of the freeway 8 floors below. I was about to shut down my computer when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Denver area code. I almost let it slide to voicemail. I don't really know why I answered. Maybe instinct. Maybe boredom. Maybe something bigger that I couldn't name yet. "Mr. Whitfield?" a man's voice said, calm and professional. "This is David Pennington from Harlow, Bennett, and Pennington Law Offices. I've been trying to reach you regarding a matter of inheritance." I frowned at the empty cubicles around me. "I think you might have the wrong Whitfield." "I don't believe so, sir," he said evenly. "This concerns your late great-uncle, Harold Whitfield." That name landed in my chest like a stone dropping into a still pond. Harold Whitfield. I hadn't heard that name spoken out loud in over 20 years. He was my grandfather's younger brother, a man who had drifted away from the rest of the family somewhere back in the 1980s. I remembered him from maybe 2 visits when I was a kid. Tall, thin, serious, smelled faintly like pipe tobacco. He always stood a little apart from everyone at family gatherings, like he was visiting from another country. "I'm not sure I understand what this is about," I said slowly. "Mr. Whitfield passed away about 4 weeks ago in Santa Fe," David continued. "You are named as the primary beneficiary in his will. We've been attempting to locate you through several channels. For a moment, I couldn't form words. The air in the office suddenly felt thinner. Primary beneficiary? I repeated, almost whispering. "Yes, sir." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the water-stained ceiling tile above my desk. There has to be some kind of clerical mistake. I barely knew the man. I haven't seen him since I was maybe 12 years old. "There is no mistake, Mr. Whitfield. If you're available tomorrow, I'd very much like to schedule a meeting. There are several assets involved, and it's important we review them in person." Assets. The word hovered in the office like smoke. I agreed to meet him the following afternoon. The drive across town the next day felt strangely weightless. It wasn't exactly excitement I felt, more like a quiet, cautious curiosity. The same feeling you get when you're opening a box in the attic that you didn't remember putting there. David Pennington turned out to be a man in his mid-40s, composed, precise, the kind of lawyer who didn't waste a single syllable. He led me into a wood-paneled office, slid a thick folder across his polished desk, and opened it with a practiced motion. "Your great-uncle maintained a very private life," he began, "but he was quietly successful. He managed his affairs meticulously for over 40 years. He passed me the first document. I looked down, and for a full 5 seconds, I genuinely thought I was misreading the numbers. A commercial property in downtown Santa Fe, fully leased to a law firm and a boutique hotel. 2 diversified investment accounts. A mineral rights trust from land in West Texas. A small rental portfolio in Albuquerque. And a personal residence outside Taos. I blinked and scanned the totals again. My vision actually blurred for a second. This can't be correct," I said softly. "It is correct, Mr. Whitfield," David replied. "After taxes and estate fees, the estimated net valuation is..." And then he named a figure that made my stomach drop in a way I hadn't felt since I was a teenager. I sat there, hands flat on the desk, trying to steady myself. And the only thought that kept circling through my head was, this changes everything. For the first time in maybe 30 years, something in my life felt like it belonged to me, and only me. Not discussed, not negotiated, not filtered through someone else's opinion. Mine. Let me pause again for a second, because I want you to really understand what that felt like. If you've spent decades being the quiet, agreeable partner in your relationship, the one who always defers, the one whose opinions are weighed and often set aside, then you know this feeling I'm describing. It's not greed. It's not ego. It's the sudden, terrifying taste of your own autonomy. And once you taste it, You cannot untaste it. On the drive home from David's office, I gripped the steering wheel tighter than I usually do. My mind was already jumping ahead, sprinting through imagined conversations. How would I tell Caroline? How would she react? I pictured her genuine smile. Not the patient one. The real one she used to have back when we were dating at the University of Colorado. Proud, warm, surprised. For once, I wouldn't be the man who simply agreed with the plan. I would be the man who brought something enormous to the table. As I pulled into our driveway on Emerson Street, I noticed the kitchen lights were still on. Margaret's silhouette moved slowly behind the sheer curtain, and I could hear Caroline's voice drifting faintly through the open window over the sink. I stepped out of the car, briefcase in hand, a small, unexpected warmth settling in my chest. I had absolutely no idea that within the next 4 minutes, I wouldn't be thinking about how to share my good news anymore. I walked up the path slowly, my shoes crunching softly on the gravel by the flower bed. The evening air was cool, faintly scented with the neighbor's grill and the honeysuckle vine Caroline had planted along the fence. And then I heard it. Caroline's voice, pitched lower than usual, just carrying over the sill. "We can't stretch this out any longer, Mom. The rate window won't hold forever." Margaret answered with that smooth, measured tone I had always mistaken for wisdom. "Then don't stretch it, sweetheart. He doesn't need the details. Just hand him a clear path and a pen." I froze. My hand hovered near the front door handle. I didn't move for maybe 3 full seconds, and those seconds felt like they stretched across years. "He's not going to ask questions," Caroline continued. "Matter of fact, he never does. You know Tom. He'll read the first page, get to the signature line, and sign because I'm standing there." My chest tightened, not in that sharp movie-style way, just a slow pressure, like someone had set a stone directly on my sternum. Margaret made a small, satisfied sound. "That's because he trusts you, dear. And trust, when you use it correctly, simplifies everything." The house key felt cold against my palm. I realized I had been squeezing it hard enough to leave a mark. Caroline exhaled slowly. "Once the refinancing goes through, we shift the funds into the Cherry Creek deal before he even reads the second closing packet. By the time he realizes the collateral structure, the property will already be in motion." "And timing?" Margaret asked softly. "It'll be fine. He'll sign. He always signs." I want you to stop and truly picture this moment with me. Because if you've ever loved someone for 30 years and heard them reduce you to a predictable signature in the hands of a plan you weren't invited to, you understand why I didn't move. I didn't shout. I didn't break down the door. I didn't do anything cinematic. I just stood there in the Colorado dusk, listening to the crickets, listening to the woman I married speak about me like I was a lock she already had the key to. And honestly, if I'm being real with you, I think if this happened to me at 30, I would have stormed in. I would have confronted them. I would have demanded answers right there in the kitchen. But at 55, something different happened inside me. A quieter, colder clarity. I thought to myself, if these two have been building this plan for months, maybe longer, then me bursting in tonight would only warn them. It would only make them more careful. And I realized, standing on my own porch on Emerson Street, that I had a choice. Scream or listen. React or prepare. And for the first time in my adult life, I chose the harder option. I stepped backward off the porch as silently as I could. I walked slowly around the side of the house, past the rosemary bush Caroline had planted 2 springs ago, and I stood for a long moment near the fence gate, just breathing. The air felt sharper out there, cleaner somehow. I don't know how long I stood by that fence. Maybe 4 minutes, maybe 8. And when I finally walked back to the front door, I put my key in the lock with deliberate casualness, jangled it once, and pushed the door open like nothing at all had happened. Caroline turned from the sink, dish towel in her hand. "You're later than usual, sweetheart," she said, tone perfectly calibrated. "Traffic on Colorado Boulevard." I lied smoothly, setting my briefcase by the leather chair. Margaret glanced up from her tablet in the den, her glasses catching the light. "Dinner's still warm, Thomas." I nodded once and took my seat at the dining table. The smell of roasted chicken, rosemary potatoes, and green beans filled the room, familiar and ordinary, and somehow now, a little sinister. I picked up my fork. My hand did not shake, And in that moment I understood something I would carry for the rest of my life. Silence is not weakness. Silence is leverage. We ate the way we always ate. Caroline talked about an article she read in the Denver Post about housing inventory. Margaret added her measured opinions at precisely the right intervals, like a bass line supporting a melody. I responded when I needed to, kept my voice warm, kept my eyes attentive. But internally, I was no longer a participant in this family. I was an observer with a notepad. Banks are tightening approvals all across Colorado, Caroline said, glancing at me with gentle concern. If we don't move soon, our numbers won't look as favorable. I chewed slowly. Maybe. Margaret's gaze flicked up toward me for half a second. Hesitation isn't caution, Thomas. It's cost. I met her eyes evenly, or it's carefulness. Her expression didn't move, but I saw something flicker, the tiniest recalibration. Then she smiled thinly. Careful men rarely build anything lasting. I didn't answer. I just took another bite of chicken. After dinner, Caroline loaded the dishwasher. Margaret drifted back to the den. I carried my briefcase upstairs to our bedroom. I closed the door softly, sat on the edge of the bed, and opened the folder David had given me. I stared at those numbers again. Those clean, precise, indisputable figures that did not require anyone else's permission or approval. And I understood something that shook me deeper than the eavesdropping had. The most important thing I had learned that night was not about money. It was about information. What people know, and what they don't. If you're watching this and you're in a relationship where you suddenly feel like you're missing pieces, please don't ignore that feeling. It's not paranoia. It's your instinct finally showing up to work. The next morning, I woke up before the alarm. Caroline was still asleep beside me. Her dark hair fanned across the pillow, her breathing slow and peaceful. For a minute, maybe longer, I just watched her. 22 years of marriage. I knew every expression on that face. When she was amused, when she was bored, when she was strategizing. This morning, she wasn't any of those things. She just looked asleep. And I remember thinking how strange it was that someone could sleep that peacefully beside a man she was calmly planning to financially corner. I got up, dressed quietly in yesterday's shirt, and drove downtown. I did not go to my office. I drove back to David Pennington's firm. The receptionist looked up, a little surprised to see me without an appointment. David came out within 5 minutes and led me into his office. "Is everything all right, Mr. Whitfield?" I took a breath. "David, I need to ask you something. Hypothetically, if someone close to me was pressuring me into a major loan using my paid-off home as collateral, would there be any benefit to them knowing about this inheritance before the transfers are fully completed?" He didn't blink. "No. In fact, depending on the specifics of your situation, discretion may be strongly advisable." I looked out his window at the Denver skyline. That's what I was afraid of. There was a careful pause. "Mr. Whitfield, is there a concern I should know about in order to protect your interests?" "Yes," I said softly. "But I'm not ready to explain all of it yet." He nodded once. "That's your right. But if you need counsel beyond estate matters, I can connect you with someone who handles exactly this kind of quiet restructuring. She's discreet, fast, and extremely good. Please," I said, "send me her contact today." He did. Her name was Elizabeth Carmichael. She ran her own boutique advisory firm in the Cherry Creek neighborhood. I called her from my car before I even pulled out of the parking garage. She answered on the second ring. "This is Elizabeth Carmichael." "My name is Thomas Whitfield," I said. "David Pennington just gave me your number." A short, attentive pause. "Of course, Mr. Whitfield. How can I help you? I need to understand how to separate personal assets from shared financial exposure. And I need to do it without drawing attention at home." I heard her pen click on her desk. "That's something we can absolutely handle. Can you be in my office this afternoon?" "Yes." That afternoon, I sat across from Elizabeth in a bright, modern office overlooking the creek path. She was maybe 40, sharp-eyed, efficient, the kind of advisor who listens more than she talks. I explained my situation in broad strokes. I kept names vague, but by the time I finished, she had already started sketching options on a legal pad. "You need to establish clear legal boundaries immediately," she said. "Separate accounts in your name alone. Independent management entities for the inherited properties." A declaration of separate property status to preserve the non-marital classification under Colorado law, updated estate documents, and quiet, but documented, protection of the current residents from any refinance entanglement. I nodded slowly. And if someone is expecting access to all of this? Elizabeth looked at me directly. Mr. Whitfield, I want you to write this down. Expectation is not entitlement. That single sentence. I can't even tell you how deeply it rearranged my understanding of my own marriage. Expectation is not entitlement. If you're listening right now and someone in your life has been acting like they own decisions that were never actually handed to them, that sentence is for you too. Keep it. Over the next 7 days, I moved pieces into place very, very quietly. I opened a private checking account at a different bank, one Caroline had never used. I redirected a small portion of my paycheck into it, nothing that would trigger alerts, just enough to establish a documented pattern. I canceled 2 automatic transfers Caroline had set up years ago and replaced them with manual payments routed through my new account. When Wells Fargo called to confirm the account change, I walked out to my car during lunch to take the call. Short answers. No explanations needed. At home, Caroline noticed friction but not the source. She asked twice about a bill that hadn't cleared on the expected day. I told her I was restructuring payment dates to optimize our cash flow. It was a reasonable, almost boring explanation. She didn't push. Margaret, though. Margaret was watching more closely. Her gaze lingered a beat longer when I walked into a room. When I sat down, when I stood up to leave. She was gathering information the way she always had, without ever seeming to. I kept my posture consistent, my tone even, my routine unchanged. If you're going to renovate a house, you don't announce the work. You move the load-bearing walls while everyone's asleep. On Thursday evening, I came home to find the dining room table covered in printed mortgage options. Not 2 or 3 sheets. A full presentation. Charts, colored tabs, sticky notes. Caroline stood beside it in a soft cream sweater, reading glasses perched professionally, looking more like a financial consultant than my wife. There you are, she said warmly. Perfect timing. I wanted to walk you through what I've been putting together. I hung my coat on the rack. You've been busy. She shrugged lightly. Somebody has to be. 6 months earlier, that comment would have stung. It would have triggered that familiar little spike of inadequacy. But that night, I just filed it away. Margaret appeared from the kitchen carrying a tray with coffee and shortbread cookies, like we were about to discuss weekend plans. Sit down, Thomas, she said pleasantly. This won't take long. I sat. Caroline slid the first document in front of me. This is the cleanest structure. Fixed rate. Manageable monthly obligation. We use the Emerson Street house as collateral, access the capital, and close on the new property before the summer rate jump. Close on what property? I asked quietly. Her eyes stayed on the paper. A purchase. That's not an answer, Caroline. She looked up with that thin smile. An investment property. What kind? Margaret cut in smoothly. The kind that appreciates, Thomas. That's the entire point. I leaned back. And who manages it? A flicker, barely visible. We do, Caroline said. Meaning you and your mother? I clarified. Margaret's lips tightened, meaning the people with experience organizing these things. I looked directly at her. I've been organizing things too, Margaret. Something shifted in the room. Nothing dramatic. Just a subtle recalibration on both of their faces. I'm not signing tonight, I said evenly. Caroline's smile didn't falter, but the muscles around it tightened. Tom, why are you being like this? Because I want several things clarified first. Ownership structure, management authority, liability exposure, default consequences, insurance requirements. Margaret exhaled through her nose. Those are technicalities. They're the entire deal. Caroline placed her pen precisely beside the paper. We can clarify anything you need. Just don't delay the application window. I'm not delaying, I said. I'm deciding. A longer silence. Caroline leaned back slowly. Fine. We'll finalize tomorrow. Next week, I corrected. Her jaw flexed. Monday. Next week. The rest of that evening passed in that strange, glassy calm where everyone at the table is listening to each other's breathing. Caroline didn't mention the documents again that night. Margaret went to bed early. And I went upstairs, opened my briefcase, and quietly reviewed the emails from Elizabeth. The declaration of separate property had been filed. The management entity had been registered in New Mexico. Interim controls were live. Andrew, working with David, confirmed that the Santa Fe leases and West Texas mineral rights were already transitioning into my sole structure. No gaps, no openings. And for the first time in my entire adult life, I lay down to sleep with something settling into place that did not depend on another human being's approval. If you've ever lain awake next to someone you love, wondering how much of your shared life is actually shared, I want you to hear this next part very carefully. On Monday morning, the house felt quieter than usual. Caroline didn't mention the mortgage at breakfast. Margaret didn't offer commentary with the coffee. But the quiet wasn't absence. It was strategy. They were waiting for the ideal moment, the ideal pressure point, the ideal setting. So was I. Around noon, Elizabeth sent a confirmation text. Everything was locked. David sent a short follow-up. Final transfers were complete. I was, for all practical and legal purposes, the sole owner of a portfolio worth more than the combined value of everything Caroline had ever managed. At 2:14 p.m., Caroline texted me at work. Dinner at 7. We need to finalize, I replied with a single word. Okay. When I pulled into the driveway that evening, I saw through the window that the dining table was set with unusual precision. 2 candles lit, plates aligned, the good water glasses, the good linen napkins. Caroline brought out roasted salmon, asparagus, and wild rice. She moved with her usual efficiency, but her eyes checked my face more often than normal. Margaret sat across from me, hands folded, posture composed. We ate for several minutes in relative silence. Then Caroline set her fork down. I scheduled a meeting at the bank tomorrow morning, Tom, 10 o'clock, just to hold the rate. We don't have to finalize if you're still not ready. And if I don't show up? She held my gaze. Then we lose the position we've spent weeks building toward. Margaret added softly, sometimes a decision is made simply by not making one, Thomas. I took a slow sip of water. Then let's make one. Caroline's shoulders relaxed a fraction. Good. Not tonight, I said. Tomorrow, at the bank. A small pause. Margaret tilted her head. You prefer a formal setting? I prefer clarity, Margaret. Caroline nodded crisply. Fine. 10 o'clock. If I'm being honest with you, I barely slept that night. Not because I was nervous, because I was ready. There's a very specific feeling a man gets when he's spent 30 years deferring and he finally knows that tomorrow he's going to stop. It's not triumphant. It's solemn. It feels like saying goodbye to a version of yourself. The next morning, the bank lobby in downtown Denver smelled faintly of furniture polish and fresh coffee. Muted colors, quiet voices. The kind of environment specifically designed to make people feel like signing is the natural conclusion of simply being there. We were led into a glass-walled office. A man in a well-tailored navy suit introduced himself, Daniel Brooks, senior lending officer. He spoke smoothly, efficiently, and slid a leather folder across the polished desk. Everything is prepared, Mr. and Mrs. Whitfield. We've reviewed your financials, and given current conditions, this structure is highly favorable. Caroline leaned slightly forward, engaged. Margaret sat back, observing. I opened the folder. The numbers were exactly as they had presented them at home. Loan amount, 30-year term, fixed rate. My name in the primary borrower field. Our paid-off Emerson Street house listed as collateral. Joint ownership on the target Cherry Creek property. Management, unspecified. Daniel tapped the top page lightly with his pen. If you're comfortable, we can move forward with the application today. Approval should be quick, given your credit profile. I closed the folder gently. Daniel, I have a few questions first. Of course, Mr. Whitfield. Who controls the management entity for the Cherry Creek property? Caroline answered before Daniel could. We do. I looked at Daniel. Is that defined in any of these documents? He glanced down. Management structures can be finalized post-acquisition, so it's not defined now. Correct. I nodded slowly. Second question, liability exposure. If the new property underperforms or sits vacant, what protections are in place for our primary residence on Emerson Street? Daniel shifted in his chair. The new property is expected to carry its own obligations. However, as with any collateralized loan, the secured asset is at risk in extreme scenarios. Meaning the house I've lived in for 20 years could be foreclosed on. Daniel's voice was careful. In extreme, prolonged default scenarios. Yes. I let that sit in the room for a full 3 seconds. Caroline's voice stayed pleasant. Tom, we already went over this at home. Not like this, Caroline. Margaret leaned forward. You're overcomplicating a straightforward transaction, Thomas. I met her eyes calmly. It's not complicated. It's specific. I turned back to Daniel. Last question. If I don't proceed today, do any of these documents obligate me going forward? No, sir. There is no obligation until both parties sign. Thank you. I closed the folder and slid it back across the desk. I'm not proceeding. The room didn't explode. It went very, very still. That kind of silence that holds weight, like humidity before a storm. Caroline stared at me. The practiced calm was still on her face, but it was thinner now, almost translucent. Thomas, you said we'd decide here. We did, Caroline. Margaret's voice dropped half an octave. On what basis? On the basis that I don't sign agreements I don't control. Caroline exhaled slowly, shaking her head. This is control, Tom. We built this plan together. I held her gaze. No, honey. You built a plan you expected me to walk into. There's a difference. Daniel cleared his throat softly. If you'd prefer, we can reschedule for a later date to revisit the terms. That won't be necessary, Daniel. I stood. Caroline didn't move. Sit down, Thomas. I did not sit down. Instead, I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a second folder. Slim, clean, professionally tabbed. I placed it on Daniel's desk and opened it to the first page. I want to be transparent, I said, keeping my voice completely even. Since we're all here discussing my finances and my house, Caroline's eyes flicked to the document. What is that? Something I did not need anyone's permission to do. Margaret's expression sharpened. Explain, Thomas. I looked at both of them, then at Daniel, who had gone perfectly still. 4 weeks ago, I inherited a significant portfolio from my late great-uncle Harold Whitfield, commercial property in Santa Fe, a rental portfolio in Albuquerque, 2 investment accounts, mineral rights in West Texas, and a personal residence outside Taos. As of last Friday, all of it is legally classified as separate, non-marital property under Colorado law, held through an independent management entity that I solely control. No one moved. Caroline blinked once, then again. You're joking. I am not, Caroline. Margaret leaned forward. When exactly were you planning to tell your family about this, Thomas? I let a pause settle. Before or after I signed something I didn't fully understand, Margaret? Caroline's lips parted, but she didn't speak. I continued calmly. The inherited assets are legally separate. They are managed independently. There is no requirement for me to leverage our home on Emerson Street. There is no reason to take on $500,000 in new debt. And there is no scenario in which I sign a document that puts the only house I've ever owned at risk for a structure I don't control. Daniel was looking down at his own desk now, clearly wishing he could become invisible. Margaret's voice, when it finally came, was tighter than I had ever heard it. You kept this from your family. I met her gaze directly. No, Margaret. I protected it from a plan I was never actually part of. Caroline spoke again. Her voice was controlled, but there was something cracked under it. That's not fair, Thomas. Fair would have been telling me the whole plan, I said quietly, including the parts you and your mother discussed through the kitchen window last Tuesday evening, when you thought I hadn't pulled into the driveway yet. The air went out of the room. Caroline's face didn't crumble. It just froze. Margaret's jaw set hard. You misunderstood what you heard. No, Margaret, I understood it perfectly. For the first time in 22 years, I understood everything perfectly. I closed the slim folder and picked it up. The Emerson Street house stays exactly as it is. No mortgage, no collateral, no refinance. If this family ever invests together again, it will be transparently, with defined control, documented structure, and proportional risk, or we don't invest together at all. That is the offer. I looked at Caroline, not angrily, just honestly. That is the decision. She did not answer. She could not. Daniel shifted slightly in his chair, uncertain whether there was any professional script for what had just occurred. There wasn't. I thanked Daniel for his time. I shook his hand firmly. I walked to the office door at a completely normal pace. Caroline and Margaret followed a few steps behind me, their footsteps slightly out of rhythm with mine on the marble floor. Outside, The Denver morning air felt sharper than it had in years. Cleaner. The sky was that impossible Colorado blue. Caroline caught up with me near our car. "Why didn't you tell me, Tom?" I looked at her for a long moment. "Because I needed to know what you would do without knowing." Margaret stepped up beside her. "So you think you have the upper hand now, Thomas?" I shook my head slowly. "No, Margaret. I think I finally have my own hand, and that's all I ever needed." I got into my car. I started the engine, and for the first time in more than 3 decades, I was not driving toward a decision someone else had shaped for me. I was driving with a decision I had already made. If you're still with me, thank you, because this next part is the part I really want you to hear. What this whole experience taught me is something I wish somebody had told me when I was 35. In America, especially for men my age, we are raised to equate peace with compliance. To think that if we just stay calm, stay agreeable, stay reliable, the people closest to us will value that. But value and usefulness are not the same thing. And the mistake most people make, the mistake I made for 2 decades, is confusing a comfortable routine with a healthy partnership. They are not the same. Here's a practical piece of advice I want you to take from this story, especially if you live in the United States. If you are married, or in a long-term partnership, please know your rights before you need them. Colorado, like most states, recognizes the concept of separate property, particularly for inheritances received during marriage, but only if those assets are properly segregated and documented. Commingling an inheritance into a joint account can reclassify it as marital property almost instantly. If you ever receive a significant inheritance, speak to an estate attorney, speak to a fiduciary advisor, and speak to them privately before you speak to anyone else. That one decision protected everything for me. Another thing, if you live with aging parents or in-laws, and you notice financial conversations increasingly bending in one direction over months or years, that's a pattern worth naming out loud, even if only to yourself. The Elder Justice Initiative, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and every state bar association in the country have resources for financial coercion within families. You are not betraying anyone by protecting yourself. You are simply refusing to betray yourself any longer. And one more thing, the most important one, honestly. Mistakes people make is assuming that silence equals safety. It doesn't. Silence is only powerful when it is strategic. Silent compliance will cost you your life in slow installments. Strategic silence will let you see your life clearly for the first time. Ask yourself tonight before you close your eyes, is there a decision in my life right now that someone else is shaping for me, while expecting me to sign at the end? Because if the answer is yes, you already know what you need to do. You just need to trust yourself enough to do it. If you were in my place, I genuinely want to know. Would you have walked in that night and confronted them directly? Would you have spoken up weeks earlier? Or would you have waited, like I did, until the truth made the decision for you? Comment 1 if you think I did the right thing by staying silent and planning. Comment 2 if you think Caroline and Margaret deserved faster forgiveness. Comment 3 if you have ever lived through something similar, even a smaller version of it. And right below that, tell me where in the world you're watching from, what city, what state, what country, and what time it is where you are right now. I genuinely love reading comments from every corner of the map, and I read far more of them than people think. Fictional story inspired by common real-life patterns, but 100% rewritten by me here in Denver, Colorado, to avoid reused content and bring you something original. If you enjoyed this story, please give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you don't miss the next one. I have more quiet, real, uncomfortable stories coming soon. Stories that live closer to our everyday lives than most people are willing to admit. Stay with me. We are only just getting started.